When the lottery numbers flashed across the screen that night, 72-year-old George Parker sat frozen in his worn-out recliner, his trembling hands clutching the ticket like it was a piece of fragile glass. $333 million. He blinked twice, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. It couldn't be real, but it was. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it echo in the quiet room. For a long time, he just sat there, tears welling in his eyes, whispering, "Thank you, Lord, thank you." George had worked his entire life at a steel plant, retired with little savings, and lived in the same modest house he'd shared with his late wife, Margaret. She had passed away 5 years earlier, leaving a hollow space in his heart that money could never fill. They dreamed of traveling the world, buying a cozy cabin by the lake. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Now, sitting alone with a winning ticket worth hundreds of millions, George felt both blessed and terrified. The next morning, he didn't tell a soul, not his children, Amanda, Brian, or Paul, who rarely visited unless they needed something, not his neighbors, and not even his friends from church. He cashed the ticket quietly through a lawyer, set up a few anonymous trusts, and decided to test something he had always wondered about. Would his family love him if he had nothing? So George did something drastic. He withdrew his money from plain sight, bought an old pickup, and started dressing like a man who'd lost everything. When his children came over for Sunday lunch, he told them he'd been scammed out of his savings and was now living on his pension alone. The reactions were telling. Amanda gasped but quickly masked her surprise. "Oh, Dad, that's awful," she said half-heartedly, her eyes already flicking to her watch. Brian just muttered something about poor financial decisions and excused himself. Paul, the youngest, sighed dramatically and said, "Well, Dad, maybe you should sell the house and move to a care facility. You're too old to handle things alone now." George smiled faintly, hiding his disappointment. "I'll think about it," he said. In the days that followed, his phone grew quieter. The calls stopped. The visits ended. None of his children checked on him except for one person, his 19-year-old grandson, Ethan. Ethan wasn't perfect. He was a college student struggling to balance studies and a part-time job, but he always found time for his grandfather. When he heard George was broke, he showed up the next day with groceries and a warm grin. "Grandpa, I don't have much," Ethan said, setting down the bags. "But we can share what I've got." George's eyes glistened. "You're too kind, son. You don't need to." "No, Grandpa," Ethan interrupted softly. "You've done enough for everyone your whole life. Let me help you now." Week after week, Ethan came by, fixing the leaky roof, cutting the grass, sharing meals, laughing together like old times. He never once asked for money or complained. To him, George wasn't a burden, he was family. One cold winter evening, George watched from the window as Ethan shoveled snow from the driveway. The boy's hands were red from the cold, his breath visible in the freezing air, but he kept going. That's when George made his decision. A month later, George invited all his children to his lawyer's office. They arrived expecting a will, or maybe to sign over his house. They found instead a smiling Ethan sitting beside their father. The lawyer handed out sealed envelopes. George cleared his throat. "I told you all I was broke," he began, and that was true in a way. Broke in spirit, broke from disappointment. "I wanted to see who would stand by me when I had nothing." Amanda frowned. "Dad, what are you talking about?" George smiled gently. "I won the lottery. $333 million. The room went silent. Brian dropped his pen. Paul's jaw tightened. Amanda gasped again, this time in disbelief. George continued, "You all had the chance to show love, kindness, or even a little care. But only one person did, Ethan." He nodded toward his grandson. "This young man didn't ask for a dime. He gave what little he had without hesitation. That's worth more to me than all the money in the world." The lawyer slid a thick document toward Ethan. It stated that a large trust, $150 million, had been set up in his name to be released over time. The rest was to be donated to charities for seniors and struggling families. Amanda started to cry. Brian tried to argue, but George stopped him with a calm wave. "You had your test. You failed not because you didn't have money, but because you forgot how to love without it. Tears rolled down George's face as he turned to Ethan. You, my boy, reminded me that compassion still exists. This fortune is yours, not just to live well, but to do good. Promise me you'll use it wisely. Ethan was speechless, tears streaming freely. Grandpa, I don't deserve this. Yes, you do, George whispered. Because you showed me what family really means. In the months that followed, Ethan used part of the fortune to start a community foundation helping elderly people in financial trouble. George moved in with him, and together they spent their days surrounded by laughter and purpose, something no amount of money could ever buy. Meanwhile, George's children tried to reconcile, but the old man had forgiven them long before. He simply wished them peace and hoped they'd learn what truly mattered in life. One spring afternoon, as George sat on the porch watching Ethan play with neighborhood kids, he smiled and said softly, "Your grandma would be proud of you, boy." Ethan looked up, smiling through tears. "I just learned from the best, Grandpa." The sun dipped behind the hills, bathing the house in golden light. For the first time in years, George felt whole. He had tested the world and found the truth. Money reveals hearts, but love heals them. Moral of the story: money can buy comfort, but not character. True wealth lies not in what you have, but in who stands beside you when you have nothing.